Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Voices of Recovery. I'm your host, Michele Eich, and every week I interview somebody who has overcome a life controlling issue with God's help. And this week, my guest is Pam. Pam, welcome to the show.
There.
It's great to have you, Pam. Can you introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Well, my name's Pamela. My friends call me Pam, though, and I'm from Georgia. If the accent didn't give me away, born and bred, been able to fortunately move around, being a military spouse for almost 20 years now. I have three grown kiddos, recently empty nesters. We're spread all over the place. Between Georgia, Virginia, Louisiana, Tennessee. And the baby I have living at home now is my fur ball, Leo. So it's me, husband, and Leo here at the
Aw,
house now.
that's awesome. My husband and I are kind of in a similar situation with our fur baby, Sonny. So it's great to
Yes,
have you and Leo on the show today.
great to be
And
here.
yeah, awesome. Well, let's go ahead and jump into your story. You told me that you have broken free from addiction to
Yeah.
substances,
Yes.
illegal substances, legal substances, and even a food addiction.
Yes.
It sounds like you were trying to find comfort and relief from some of the trauma that you faced as a child, which is a story that I unfortunately hear time and time again. And I know that these things are not easy to talk about, but I'm just so grateful that people like you are coming forward and sharing stories because I think it helps so many people.
Definitely. I have found, reading, whether it be, I don't know, Joyce Meyer or Brene Brown, or finding bits and pieces of a song or uh, a quote that help pull me through, and then listening to other people's testimonies too, which is how I come to find out about you. I definitely have touched and helped me along the way. So if I can do that for one person, it's well worth telling my story.
That is so beautiful. I love that. You know, when we go through difficult things and then we feel like we're alone, we feel like we're
Hmm.
the only one who's experienced it. It's so isolating and it's so difficult. And it just, we're carrying weights that we don't need to be carrying.
Yes. And unfortunately, there's more of us than we probably could even imagine. So, yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, let's go ahead and share some of those things that happened to you, Pam. And it sounds like it started for you as a child around the age of 3. And at that time, your parents got divorced.
Right.
Divorced. Okay.
Yeah. And I remember, being around three, my sister being a little over a year old, maybe, moving. I remembered loving my dad and going back and, at the time, I remember mom and dad being together. I remember loving my daddy. And then them divorcing, and us kind of being in between for a little while before she uh, would find and move in, eventually years later marry a stepfather of mine. But for a while there was some back into between my mom and stepdad's and my biological dad's house, and um, loved going there, loved going to church with my granny and papa, Sunday dinner at granny's every other Sunday, and just remembering his place kind of being a place of sanctuary in a kind of sort of way for me, away from some of the craziness, that was kind of going on at my mom's house at the time being. And then eventually, as time went along, hearing arguments when it would be pickup time for the weekend for us to go, or us actually not going when it was a scheduled weekend. And then those visits kind of started getting sporadic, and they might would happen and they might would not. And um, I remember being at a window looking out, waiting on daddy to come pick us up, and daddy not ever showing up, and kind of wondering, what was that my fault, what I've done to cause that or whatever. He married a lady that had 4 boys at the time. Was it because me and my sister were girls? Just a lot of crazy kid things that kind of go through your mind at the time, because I didn't understand what was happening.
You know, I hear that a lot. And I'm going to say something. I've said it before on the show, and I really don't want to put condemnation on anybody. I have been divorced myself,
Hmm.
but God's word said he hates divorce. He does not hate divorced people. Okay. I want to make that clear. He doesn't hate divorced people, but he hates divorce because it hurts people. and he
Right.
loves people. And the family unit is God's design for life.
Mhm.
And we all want to talk about who's going to be in the White House, but we don't want to talk about who's in our house, right? And
Right.
that is the most important thing, honestly.
Mhm.
And so, I'm not trying to bash divorced people because I've been there myself,
Yeah, me too. Yep, been
but
there.
it opens the door for the things that you're going to talk about, for the
Yes.
abuse and then the later substance abuse and all of that. So
Right.
I say all that to say, if you are divorced and you are sharing custody of children, I just encourage you to work extra hard
Mhm.
with your former husband or wife in making sure that your kids come first, fighting in front of them, arguing about visitation and all of that. Just it puts something on the children. And I remember when my kids were having visits with their dad, God said to me, your kids always miss one of you.
Mhm.
And that really touched my heart. And it made me cry
Yeah.
because when mom and dad are in the home raising their children, which is God's design, and I understand we don't always follow God's plan. We don't, and myself included with that. But there's that security. Both mom and dad are there. But when they're going back and forth on the visitation, they always miss either mom or dad.
Mhm. Right.
And if you are in a situation where maybe you're separated, or maybe you're fighting, or maybe you're contemplating divorce, I implore you to get some counseling and to work on it, because you will be doing yourself and your children a massive favor. So
Right.
again, I just hear this so many times, that the starting point of the trauma happens when the family splits.
Right. And I've seen a lot of different family dynamics, and have friends of my own that have been through a lot of different types of whatever relationships,
Mhm.
divorces, remarrying and things. And it can definitely be done where there can be some cohesiveness between us.
Absolutely.
But like you say, it takes work, and all parties have to be willing to put the work and effort in, because it's definitely takes it. Um, I remember daddy, or at the time, mama being young, because they were young at the time. And I
Mhm.
mean, it's a
Sure.
lot of it goes with age and experience. And
Right.
as we get older, I think, just generally mellow out a little bit more. So, like I say, yeah, I remember just a lot of, I remember mama not always being easy to get along with at times.
Yeah.
I'm not easy to get along with all the time. And then I also remember thinking, like you say, maybe I wish daddy had fought a little bit harder, or was there more he could have done, or whatever. So and again, I think, yeah, the general idea is kids tend to internalize that, like we turn everything around, that it's something we could have done,
Sure.
what should we have done, or whatever. So I do remember that being, some of the first something's wrong with me kind of feelings,
Yes.
maybe. I was left-handed. I kept in second grade or first grade, first or second grade. I remember the teacher trying to take my scissors out of my left hand and put them in my right hand, and thinking that just that little mental thing of, what's wrong? There's something wrong with me.
Right.
Why are they doing that kind of thing?
Mhm.
And then yes, being talking about the food, being just a chubbier kid. I had a sister that my sister was 2 years younger than me, and she tended to be a little thinner, and not as hard for her with the weight issue as I had. I've always kind of had a weight issue, back into. And I remember the first time I ever took uh, meds for weight loss, I was in fourth grade going into the fifth grade,
Wow.
or no, maybe fifth or sixth grade. I
Mm.
do remember over a summer, from going from the seventh grade into the eighth grade, being on a very strict diet that my stepdad put me on, and crying from exercises he was making me do on the floor.
Mm.
But I lost more weight than I'd ever lost, and I went to the eighth grade slimmer than I'd ever been. Now, of course, seventh, eighth, ninth grade, the weight comes back,
Mm.
or whatnot. But just that mental, that struggle from, fifth, sixth,
Sure.
seventh grade with weight, getting called, I think I've, in us chatting, my stepdad Mom and him actually eventually would get married after living together for several years. And then I also, from going from the fourth grade, my biological name being one thing, into the fifth grade, a new last name, and
Mhm,
just getting, called Pam Well because that rhymed with my last name, or just
mhm.
ugly, names from just kind of bullying from the weight kind of thing or whatever. So, and that was hard, being picked on in school because of, first of all, who I was and what my
Right.
last name was, and then also with the weight and then that kind of issue too. So a lot of things I had already started to internalize, and food was a good coping mechanism. It made me feel good. It
Sure.
was my friend. It didn't talk bad about me, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely. Pam, you mentioned that you couldn't really figure out why your dad stopped coming to visit. And
mhm.
was it because he had four boys, or was it because I'm left-handed? Or,
Right,
we think of these things, and it seems silly to us as adults, but children have these seeds planted that can really develop into roots that produce some very destructive fruit. But I
yeah,
think when we're young, we put our parents on a pedestal. And I remember when I was young thinking all adults had it together, right?
hmm,
And I just have to
hmm,
laugh at that because it's so far from the truth. And most of
right,
us are messed up. And, we're in
yes,
a process with God trying to get the pieces put back together. But we don't have the thought, is there something wrong with dad that he's not coming to visit me? Is the problem
right,
on his end? We don't usually have that thought. It's, what is wrong with me? If I were prettier, if I were thinner, if I were a better student, if I were a better athlete, if I were fill in the blank, right?
right.
And so
Clean
we
my room
try
better.
all these things,
Yeah.
and it's
And I never really thought about it that way until, of course, now years later, I can look back and I can see that the reason why my mom behaved some of the ways that she did was because she's got trauma herself from things,
right.
growing up. She was the youngest of 9 kids, and, eventually would find out that there were other siblings. And so just a lot of trauma with her. And then, because there was about a 10-year gap, I didn't see my biological dad at all. Of course, there are things on his side I don't know as much about as I do for my mom. I can tell you, though, she's one of the strongest women I know, and
Right.
definitely is one of those kind of, when something was going to get done, she was going to make sure it got done regardless. So that will to keep getting up and trying again, or not giving
Yeah.
up, that spirit definitely is something, I got from her. And on the flip side, she's always told me I've got my daddy's heart, so the
Mhm.
crybaby in me, or the maybe that person that wants to reach out and help somebody, side might have more so come from him. So there definitely are parts of both of them that I'm very proud to have inside.
That's beautiful. Well, a lot of times we don't know what happened in previous generations.
Hmm.
Our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents. We could take it all the way back to Adam and
Hmm.
Eve, right?
Right.
uh, but I think back then people didn't talk about things, and I feel like that's changing. That
Hmm.
people are starting to share more, and I believe that that's healthy. But at the end of the day, if it hadn't been for God intervening in my life, I would be repeating those same cycles with my kids. And so I'm very determined to partner with God to break those cycles so that it doesn't continue into the next
Right.
generation.
Yeah, definitely. And I've never heard generational curses until,
Mhm.
the last several years. I'd never even fathomed the thought of, hey, I can be the one to break a generational curse. It could start with me. I can be that one.
Amen.
I could be that person. Yeah. And just striving to let that be a goal that I have.
Sure.
I want that to be part of my legacy, that, because I'm gonna be emotional, but because I took my children to an AA meeting with me, or I took my children, and I have let them know this was what's wrong. I didn't hide. For a while, I hid things from them,
Sure.
but now being open and honest with them, and them seeing that they are aware, that they see the signs,
Yes.
and talk with your kids are when they're old enough,
Mhm.
but still young enough too. You don't want
Right.
to wait till they're 21 to give them an alcohol to talk.
Yes.
My son knows because I'm subject to be have an addictive personality, you very well could be too. So if you decide, if you don't ever drink, you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
But if you decide to take a drink, here's some warning signs, and be aware, kind of thing.
That's so good. Okay, so your dad kind of faded
Yep.
off and your mom eventually married your stepdad.
Hmm.
So this
Yep.
part would be a little more difficult to talk about, but I do appreciate your willingness to do that, Pam. It sounds like that your stepdad was abusive to both you and your sister.
Right. He was abusive to me and my sister, and even my mom too. All of us along the way, and other people as well. But along the way, I noticed that it seemed like my sister, who was 2 years younger, kind of got a little extra special treatment. She
Mm.
got to maybe not take a nap when it was time to take a nap, or go to the store a little more, or just weird things. And I couldn't quite pinpoint what the difference was. And again, internalize that there must be something wrong with me. And it wasn't until she was probably 11 years old that and there were times that we had conversations about different things, but at the age of 11, she wrote a letter and ran away from home. And basically it just said that she couldn't live at home anymore, knowing what was being done to her. So there was some sexual molestation of my sister and myself. I was probably about 13 at the time, 12 or 13ish, early 13. And she was missing for 2 days. She was gone, and finally wound up at the sheriff's department in the town that we lived in. And I just remember going, to being outside of the sheriff's department's door, and my mom going in whatever the room was, and then kind of, I guess, informing her where my sister had been for a couple of days and why, she had run away, what she was saying. And mama walking out, looking at me, and just looked at me and said, "Is it true?" And I, said, "Yes, it is true."
Mhm.
Um, and so, life changed as we knew it from that point on, as far as the cat was out of the bag, per se. So we lived in a really small town, where a lot of people know what your business is. And for the most part, um, it's kind of kept hush hush. But there was we went to court, and it was an open court case. And um, there were just questions I thought just so sickening asked of my sister on the stand. And I remember sitting there feeling like, do they really expect her or us? And I say her because the charges were brought against on her behalf. I wasn't the one that ran away, and I wasn't the one accusing of what had happened. So the questions were geared more so on her behalf. And just thinking, do they really expect us to keep this wrote down on a calendar, like times and dates? And um, just feeling like the victim all over again. And she had doctors testifying on her behalf or whatnot. And then when it was all said and done, he was found not guilty, and he walked away. Um,
Wow.
so at that point, they asked if I wanted to file charges, and whatever, as far as what had happened, and tell what had happened to me. And because of the Tammy situation, we had went to some therapy, and we were in a group, and I hated it. I didn't like sitting there and hearing other kids talk about what had happened to them. I definitely didn't want to say what had happened to me. And I just told my mom I wasn't going to go back again. I didn't want to do group therapy, and she didn't make me go back. And so, of course, when they asked about if I wanted to press charges, I was like, no, I'm not getting up there, and I don't want those questions to be asked of me. But I remember in my mind that day knowing it really doesn't matter if I testify or not, because God knows what happens. He knows what's happened. I know what's happened, and my sister knows what's happened. And if don't nobody else know what happened, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me.
Mhm.
Um, God knows, and that's what mattered to me at that point.
Wow, that sounds so horrific, Pam. I just can't imagine going through that. And I know that many people don't come forward because they're made to feel like it's their fault,
Right.
whether it's a direct message or a subliminal message that you brought this on yourself, or it's just awful.
Yeah.
And, you know, when people seem to get away with things, it is so frustrating.
Hmm.
We have all of this legal system and judges and juries and Supreme Court and all of it. And like you said, God knows,
Right.
and it will be dealt with. And
Hmm.
when I find myself getting frustrated that it seems like certain people get off scot-free, like
Right.
there is coming a day.
Yep. And
And
we don't know. I remember thinking, now that I can look back, thinking, I don't know what went through his mind at night when he went to sleep. I know what goes through mine, and what don't. And I'm able to lay down and rest easy at night, but I don't know the kinds of things that he might have dealt with up until, and he's passed away now. But the other thing too for me was, as far as like, keeping some of the things internalized too, was because I love his children, my stepsisters, and a stepbrother, and things like that. And because he was 20 some odd years older than my mom, I have by marriage nieces and nephews that were basically the same age as me and my sister were. So we played together more like cousins played together.
right,
And loving them, and that feeling of, just because he did something bad doesn't mean I don't love them and they don't love me, and wanting still that part of the family to be able to, at holiday or whatever, we still will see each other and be in contact and things, despite the trauma and hurt that one person or individual caused in the
that's
situation. Yeah.
good. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, God is merciful and God is gracious and God is loving, but he's also just.
Yes.
And I'm very grateful that I don't have to pay for my own sins.
Oh,
I'm very,
yes.
very grateful that
Yes.
Jesus
Yes.
has paid for my sins.
Yes.
Amen.
And I remember, thinking too now that it's so comforting just to think that all those battles that I felt like I had to fight, I don't have to fight them. God is my vindicator. I
Oh,
just have to
God, yes.
turn it over to him. And what a weight off of my shoulders to feel like I don't have to be the person to, whatever, to bring
Absolutely.
just, or make it just, or whatever. Yeah.
That's good. So it sounds like you, with your granny, went to church at an early age. So you did have some knowledge of God.
Mhm.
But as these things happened, and we won't go into great detail, but you did uh, undergo abuse from two other men.
Yes.
So you were thinking, like, what's wrong with me? This is my fault. I'm bringing this on myself, which is another very, very heavy weight to carry.
Hmm.
And, uh, these things happen. And sadly, your sister died. And how
Yeah.
old was she when she passed
She
away?
was 18. She was killed July of 1993 at 18 years old, and I was 20 at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you're carrying this trauma from childhood, uh, abuse from three men,
Yep.
watching what happened to your sister, losing your sister, and then kind of feeling like the guilty were still walking around like nothing happened, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so all of these things kind of piled together. Were you angry with God? Were you not believing in God? Like how was this affecting your relationship with God?
Yes. At the time that my sister was killed, was in the middle of a marriage. I had gotten married to my first husband, and was married for about 6 years before we divorced. But at that point, things were, fairly decent in our marriage, and I was remember, thinking, oh, I'm going to do this right, and we're gonna, I'm going to be married one time, always to my
Mhm.
baby's father, and this that, or the other. And then, yeah, Tammy getting the phone call one night at 11, it's about 11 or 11:30, and my mom telling me, that Tammy been in an accident, to meet her at the hospital. But also knowing my mom and her being the calmness in her voice, I was like, it can't be that bad, because otherwise she'd be
Mhm.
crazy spastic over the phone. I didn't get in a hurry on the way to the hospital. I drove calmly there, got up, left my husband and my oldest daughter at the time in bed, and just told him I'd be back. And I went to the hospital alone. And walking through the door, and my aunt looking at me and said she didn't make it. And
Mm.
I could not, it just didn't register to me, like she didn't make it. Like, what does that mean? And thinking, for the next several days now, that how's the world keep going on? Like, how are people still smiling, and how are people still going to work? Because my world is stood still. Like, it should stop. And it don't. Life doesn't stop. It just keeps going.
Right.
And I remember being angry. Like, I was angry that all of our abusers were still alive and she was gone. That whatever punishment in my mind I thought should happen had not happened. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I was just angry, and I got away from, at one point I was teaching Sunday school and in the choir
Mhm.
and different things. And uh I went in, I guess, looking back now, I can see that it was some depression and anxiety and things. I've been diagnosed with, PTSD from the trauma, and but not knowing what that was or having a diagnosis at the time. And so I just retreated to myself and food, and eventually would get to weigh right at 400 pounds. The weight just kept coming. Uh, and that's just kind of, at that point in my life, is what I kind of turned to, was food, to the point to where, yeah, before it was all over with, I got up to about 400 pounds.
Wow. So it sounds like your first marriage ended.
Hmm.
You you met somebody. Well, you already known this man
Yes.
from junior high,
Yep.
okay, and you rekindled that relationship, and you eventually married.
Hmm.
And he is in the military, and so you
Yes.
were traveling, and he was deployed to different places. So there was a lot of moving around, as typical for a military family.
Right.
So Pam, at what point did you start experimenting with drugs? You mentioned the food, and that was
Yes.
creating a big problem in your life.
Right.
Um, when did drugs kind of come into the picture for you?
Yeah. And then the first time I remember ever trying drugs was cocaine. And it was out just on a weekend night with some friends. My husband was deployed at the time, and it was just a random, want to try this, and me thinking, oh, that's sound, I've never done that or whatever. And then it being a every once in a while, some maybe 4 to 6 month kind of thing, if that. And then, you know, as Greg was gone, and maybe, I don't know, 6 months or so had passed, and that feeling of loneliness, like, and at the time I look back and I can't pinpoint any one thing in particular, but I can say that just the stress of being alone with 3 children, working a full-time job,
Mm,
wondering if, my husband's going to come home, kind of thing. Just that was a way of me to, when I was on, it seemed like when I was depressed or whatever, I mean, it was a feat to take a bath for me. I mean, there were times when it'd be a week and I didn't take a bath. So
mm,
for me, I realized that the cocaine give me that energy to get up and to clean the house and to go to work and whatever here and there. So what used to be an occasional night out with friends and have fun kind of thing has now turned more so to, I need this to actually get things done, or have the
right.
energy to get the things done around the house I need to do.
Mm,
um, and still keep that front up that I felt I had to keep, that I was I can do this kind of thing.
sure.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned earlier that you just had a lot of things buried and you wanted to keep them buried.
Yes.
And sometimes they start to resurface a little bit by event that happens, or a memory, or something triggers that. And
Hmm.
then going
Yeah.
back into those substances that make you forget or make you feel powerful, or explain
Yeah.
that a
Well,
little to us.
you know after one of the, it's kind of that bittersweet, the love hate or curse kind of thing with the military, where you kind of get comfortable in an area, and then you're rooted up and you're moved. And for us, it'd be about every 2 to 3 years. Now, in some situations that it was a curse, but in some situations it was a saving grace too. So there were times, because we would move, I'd have those stints of sobriety or whatever, and we're talking, when I say for the period of time that I would have been using would have been about a 4 to 4.5 year period, off and on, and some, when it was bad, it was really bad, but then there might be months that, I had nothing because of us relocating or whatnot. But we'd get to a new place. And I remember one of the times that when it was starting to get really bad, would have been, us getting ready to PCS from when we were in Fort Campbell. And it would have been the first time that I left my oldest daughter. She'd met a fella and decided that she's going to stay. They had a little place together that they were buying. And so that was a big life change moment for me, a big anxiety kind of, and yes, along the way, there's still that little girl inside of me that thinks back to my dad's kind of situation, my sister's situation, the abuse
Sure.
that I've still not dealt with, mind you, because I've
Yes.
got Girl Scouts and dentist appointments and basketball and soccer and all
Mhm.
those mom things. So for those period of years where I'm raising children and working, it was easy to push those things and feelings back. And now that my kids are old enough that I'm actually able to leave one of them because she's self-sufficient,
Mhm.
I'm starting to lose myself a little bit now. Like, what am I, a little less time, because there's now I've got 2 kids versus 3, and I have more time for those things to start coming back to the forefront of my mind. I'm starting to think about things a little bit more. And
Mm.
I did reach out, and I started a little bit of therapy at that point. And then they put me on some anxiety medication and
Mhm.
depression medication. And for several years, I took that. Um, but then again, we'd get ready and move to a new location. And now I'm subjected to, now I've got to find a new therapist. And does that therapist like the same medication that this therapist has had me on that to me
Mm.
has been working, kind of thing? So, and not all psychiatrists or therapists do things the same way.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so that would cause me to retreat or not seek help as quickly some of the times. And so, yeah, not reaching out at whenever we were in San Antonio would have been, probably the one of my biggest there and in Georgia, because I tended to try to medicate myself and not have to go and tell those stories again to a new
Right.
person. Yeah.
One of the names of the Holy Spirit is Wonderful Counselor. And when we take him with us,
Hmm.
we can move to different towns and different locations, but at the end of the day, he's really the one who can get to those hard issues that we keep burying.
Hmm.
Uh, I heard once somebody say that real counseling is pointing someone to the wonderful counselor because he knows you, he made you, he knows what's
Yes.
really going on, he knows the history, he knows it all. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't be going to a therapist or going to a
Hmm.
counselor necessarily,
But a
but
Christian-based counselor for me was a big issue. I
yeah,
mean, my therapist wasn't afraid to talk with me about God, or wasn't,
amen.
or the ones where I did the most healing. And that was a big deal to me at the time, because I had some in the past that were not as open to that, or didn't
Sure.
really, when I would reach, they didn't elaborate on those points when I would make, so it made a difference when I finally did find a Christian-based therapist
Absolutely.
that, yeah, yes, made all the world a difference. Yep.
Well, we look for different things and different people to fix us, and we can't fix another person. But again, we can point them to God, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get more into your story, Pam, but we're not quite there yet.
Yep.
So things are still continuing to decline.
Yes.
You told me that you were in a car accident and they
Mhm.
prescribed some medication that also caused you some problems.
Yes. I was in a wreck and had to be cut out with the jaws of life. The
Mm.
truck flipped 3 times and throwed my ex-husband now out of the vehicle. And I don't know what number disc. I don't keep it. There's some disc in my neck and my lower back that are messed up and have been. And I've got issues with my knees. And then over time, of course, being 400 pounds didn't help the knees either. And yes, there were at one point that I was prescribed, narcotic pain medication. Um, and then it got to the point to where, I don't know, at some point I complained about that medication not working, and I was prescribed a fentanyl patch to wear on
Mm.
top of the narcotic pain medication.
Wow.
And well, then, oh, well, maybe a back injection, will help you too. So I had back injections and all of this at the same time. And
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, there were, several years of me being on probably that level of medication.
Mm.
It couldn't have been more than, the 3 years though, because mind you, now we're getting ready again and we're moving from this location to another location. And that's really where I want to say, life-changing moments started happening is when I moved from uh, uh, you know, Georgia actually to Louisiana, and we went from San Antonio to Georgia while my husband did a stint in Korea for a little while, and then from Georgia to Louisiana, where a lot of people, Fort Polk, backwoods, little town, hate a lot of military people hate going. And I just thank God every day for sending us there because that's where I found my tribe and a church, and I found God and I found myself, and the
Mm.
most healing that I'd ever done in a
That's
town that
amazing.
most people don't ever want to go.
There was a little slice of heaven in Fort Polk, right?
Yes, yes,
All
it's
right.
an hour away to a Target, but you can definitely find God right there in town. Yes, right
Amen.
there. Yeah.
Amen. That's beautiful. Well, Pam, it sounds like for a very long time you were able to manage things. You were still functioning on some level,
Hmm.
and you were keeping this from your husband.
Yes.
When we continue to sweep things under the rug, and then there's like this humongous mountain under the rug,
Hmm.
it's hard to ignore it.
Yes.
And you told me that you finally just broke down and confessed to him what was really going on in your life.
Yeah. We got to the point to where my oldest daughter is, states away, and I've got a daughter in high school and a son getting ready to go to high school, and life is kind of falling apart. Me and, my daughter that's at home is not getting along very well. I am not getting to football games like I used to before. What used to be manageable is now not manageable anymore. And I remember bouts of just not liking myself. And I never have been a person that liked to lie. I didn't like to lie. So I would do the white lie thing, like I'm going to Walmart and I'll be back in a while. And then it'd be hours, hours. I didn't lie because I did go to Walmart. I mean, in my mind, that's what I'm thinking. I
Right.
went to Walmart. I went 151 other places too, or I went and stayed several hours long, and then that cycle of feeling guilty for telling the lie, or the look on my husband's face when I wouldn't come home until the sun's coming up, or the disappointment, that I could see in his and my kid's face.
Mm.
And that cycle of using to not feel the guilt. And then because I felt guilt, I would use, and it was just like this vicious cycle
Yeah.
that I found myself in. And I just remember looking at him one day and I said, I need help. I can't do this. And I remember looking in the yellow pages one night and just calling drug drug hotlines that were in the back of the phone book. And I'm
Mm.
going to tell you, it's much harder to get somebody on the phone at those toll-free numbers than you would imagine.
Mm.
Um, and somebody calling me back and offering me a bed at a rehabilitation center in Florida, um, and us deciding together that I would go. And my husband, mind you, is military, and we're used to him missing a holiday, a Christmas, a birthday, or whatever.
Mm.
I've always been at every one. But because I chose to go to rehab, I missed my daughter's birthday and my son's birthday because I left right around the beginning of
Mhm.
December, and both of their birthdays are December. So I missed Christmas too.
Mm.
But they both told me, the best gift I could give them was to go and get myself
Amen.
healthy. And
Amen.
so I went to rehab and come back after the first of the year, sober and from fresh from rehab for the first time in my 30s.
Mhm.
So
I like what you said about the best gift you can give them is you healthy, because that's so true. And
right.
yeah, amen to
Yeah. And
that.
I still have the letters, that they wrote
Mhm.
telling me that, and just of support while I was there. And
Those are priceless.
yes, definitely. Yep. And they're priceless in the sense of the support I had back then, and they're priceless in looking back and seeing how far that I've come since
Oh
those
yeah,
letters were written to,
absolutely.
yeah, and where our
I-
relationships are now. So yes, um,
that is beautiful. I love
yeah,
that. It sounds like after you got out of the rehab, things were better for a while,
yep.
but then things
Yep,
kind of
we were
started.
San Antonio. I'm fresh out of rehab. We're getting ready to, um, we're there for several months, and we get orders that Greg is going to do a Korea tour. So now we are stuck with trying to figure out, where am I, fresh out of rehab, a few months out of rehab, clean and sober. Where am I going to be while he deploys? Because mind you, that tended to be some of my lowest, whether it be my drug use or my depression and my anxiety, was when I was alone. I've got abandonment issues, that I didn't realize along the way that have come up, and so he was my lighthouse in the storm. And when he was removed, I kind of fell apart. Which, looking back, I've apologized to him. I had to be exhausting to him at times because, now that I'm able to, with clarity, look back and see the it was inside of me. It was God and the Holy Spirit, and what was inside of me was the only thing that could make the change. He couldn't do it for me. He couldn't love me enough. My kids couldn't do it. They couldn't love me enough. I had to love me enough, and I had to pull that strength from the love of Jesus, and what He
Yeah,
had done for me. So that's where the strength come from. I had to look internally for that, and to Him, to be in His
that's
Word
true.
more. Yeah.
That's so true. I'm trying to stay off social media right now, but I did get on over the weekend and I saw a post about just somebody saying, I am so alone,
Mm,
and I said, you have Jesus. And it's not a cliche, it's the
mhm.
truth.
Yes,
And we
definitely.
try to put our happiness on other people. And we try to think that their actions are going to fix us, and they're not.
No.
Those relationships are beautiful and they can definitely enhance life, but we cannot build our life on another person or we will be sadly
Right. And
disappointed.
part of my self-forgiveness was apologizing to him and forgiving myself for putting that off onto them. How selfish of me at the time, to even expect that, yeah, my happiness is you trying to, bend over backwards to keep
Sure.
me happy, which, he did. God bless him. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what he did, it would have never been enough. It would have never, because
Absolutely.
it's not his place. It's just not his place.
That is an excellent point. No matter what
Yeah.
he did, it wouldn't be enough because it's not his place. That is a
Right.
place for God. Okay.
Yep.
That's so good, Pam. So it sounds like you went back to your hometown. Is that
Hmm.
correct? When he
Yes, that's where we
deployed?
decided we'd end up going back to where, yeah, my mom lived. His family's not far from that town, and that's just where we decided, and he would feel better with me being.
Okay.
So yes, moved in a little place right across from my mom, and was excited about being there and back in my hometown because, mind you, we've been gone now for years with the
Mhm.
military, um, and yeah, we were there, maybe, let's see, Greg left like August of one year, and then by February I was using again. Um, it happened, was really good, and just all of a sudden I didn't have a driver's license when we first got there because of some tickets that had to be paid, and eventually got those taken care of, and that kind of, not whatever. And when I got my mom was a little overprotective at times. And rightfully so, like I say, probably, and no telling the things that a mom has to deal with when they got a child using or whatever, and her knowing some of my history. But she was a little overprotective, overbearing, and there were times that I was accused of stuff that I wasn't doing. And then that just it led to eventually us arguing one day, and me uh, confiding in a friend, and her offering something to calm me down. And and then we're back. That felt really good, and that helped numb and the pain that and hurt I was feeling. And and it wasn't, I mean, in a matter of a couple of months, it was full blown again. All the work that had been done was out the door. um, and you know I would have to say that my hometown there would have been the very worst of, whether it be because of the type of drugs I was using at the time, the fact that my family was there and seeing firsthand, you know, was definitely some of the darkest times, and the worst times of my addiction. Um, I remember having a friend come over one day and me just crying, and actually two friends from high school, coming over and talking, and rem- were just reminding me that they knew the person that I was, and the person they were seeing is not the person that they knew. And me
Mhm.
just feeling like I didn't know if I was gonna ever, and my mom and my husband too at the time. I just want the old Pam back. I just want the old Pam back. And I'm just, and of course, in the midst of my addiction, that Pam's gone. I'm not that Pam anymore, kind of thing.
Mhm.
I was offended by them saying sometimes that they wanted the old Pam
Sure.
back. Um, because in my mind, the old Pam was the Pam that was still covering and hiding things. I was still covering up things and hiding hurt or whatever. And just because that Pam was good and happy Pam to you, don't mean that that's what I was feeling inside. And they didn't understand, that at the time.
When we spoke earlier, Pam, you said that things got real ugly real fast. You were even to the point of selling drugs,
Yes. Uh,
using, and then your husband came home early.
yes.
Told me that if
He
it hadn't been for that, that you probably would be dead or in jail.
Right. Yeah, he should have been gone for 12 months, on his unaccompanied Korea tour, and the unit he was in dispersed. And so instead of coming back the following August or Septemberish,
Mhm.
he ended up coming home in June. And, at the time, I found myself scrambling around because in my mind, and in an addict's mind, or I thought crazy things like, I'm going to make the money back I had lost him. So that's where the selling kind of took place. I'm going to make that money back that I've costed us and our family, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, and it just being left that other people owed me that money now, so it never come back. And my husband finally, coming home and now, because I've admitted things to him in the past, of course, he knows what the signs are. He knows a little bit more about, my mind frame and that kind of frame of mind and that kind of stuff. And so, we had a conversation, hardest conversation I would ever have with him. At one point, I was in a hotel room because I didn't want the people I was associated with even knowing where I was staying at or whatnot. I didn't want to put my family in any kind of danger. And I
Mm.
mean, there were people that I felt were dangerous for them to even be around. And so I removed myself from the family unit, which really hurt my husband because he looked at it one kind of way. And that's not the way I was intentionally meaning it to be, but it hurt him and it hurt them.
Mm.
Um, I called myself protecting him, but that's really what it didn't end up doing that in the end. And so I remember having a conversation. My children had got to the point to where they were just like, leave her, like go to your next duty station,
Mm.
divorce her. She's not gonna do any better. I just whatever. And I remember thinking in my mind that I wanted to do better, but I did not want to go to this next duty station on a lie. Like I had to come 100% clean. And I didn't want, if it meant me telling Greg what was going on and him leaving me, then that would be the price I'd have to pay. But I wasn't willing to not tell him and him agree for me to go with him on a lie. You know what I'm saying? I wanted it to be because he really wanted, regardless of what had happened, he knew the truth, and we were going on a fresh start, no lies, um, to this duty station. And I was going to put the work in if he was willing to give me another chance. And we had a really hard conversation, and he cried and I cried, and we decided that I would go with them. And my son did not like sitting beside me in the moving truck very good from that ride from Georgia to Louisiana.
Mhm.
Um, so it took a few months after getting there for my son to see that I was making changes that I'd said, because so, I'm sorry only goes so far. after you
That's
hear
so
it so
true.
many times, yeah, after they've heard me
Very
say
true.
it time and time again, and then whatever, relapsing or them see,
Mhm.
whether then, yeah, they had just got
Good.
tired of hearing it. Yep.
One of my favorite quotes is, "The best apology is change behavior."
Yes.
And
And
it's
my
true.
kids will tell you that's why we are where we are now, because and your kids are watching when you don't. And other people are watching you when you don't even realize that they're paying
True.
attention.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what I do. I get up every day now and I strive to be the kind of be more like Jesus every day, to love like he
Mhm.
does, to serve like he does, to just be more like him, because my children they do watch and they see the effort that I've made, and that's what's made the biggest change and has healed our relationships the way
That's
that it
beautiful.
has.
That's
Yeah.
very encouraging, Pam, and, you are not perfect, neither am I. There's only one who's perfect, and that's Jesus, but with his love and power working through us, we can do better.
Yes, definitely.
So, one of the things that you told me was that when you went to Louisiana, you went to see a counselor or a therapist, and this person really made a big impact on you. Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that.
So I went to the hospital there on post, and the first therapist, that for a little while, I seen a psychiatrist and a therapist, and Mr. Johnson, I remember sitting in his office and him kind of reminding me of my daddy, who I'd always, kind of still in the back of my mind, even though things had happened, the beard and the mustache, and he just had that, I don't know, that gentleness about him. And I remember feeling comfortable talking with him about things that had happened, and just the calmness I could feel. I'm one of those aura kind of people. So
Mhm,
when I'm in a room with somebody, I usually know within the first 10, 15 minutes, if I'm going to be okay sharing things. And
mhm,
I just remember feeling that calmness. This is the place I'm supposed to be. And there were times when it was hard to get up and go to his office because I was just exhausted after our sessions or whatever. And in the beginning, I would kind of go and then I'd miss a few weeks, and then he'd check on me or whatever. And I'd never really had anybody to kind of do that. Like, okay, what's going on? Where are you at? Kind of thing. One of the things that sticks out the most in my mind, or one of the first things that stick out the most in my mind, is one of the days sitting there talking to him and him stopping me and saying, you know what, first of all, you could be a billboard. You could be the picture of a billboard for, child abuse, addiction, whatever.
mhm,
You could be the face of that on a billboard. He said, and based on the things that you've been through from, all that we've talked about up until now, I think you need to stop right now and just pat yourself on the back. And he literally made me stop and put my hand and pat myself on the back. And he said, I think you've done a pretty damn good job. And
wow,
I just remember thinking, I've never had, I don't know if I've ever had anybody tell me as bad of a job and as off the track as I feel I'd ran the train. Him
mhm,
telling me that, making me pat myself on the, and pointing out the things I'd done right, even amongst the wrong, the
mhm,
things that I was doing right, and things that I could help to add to push those things in a more of a right direction.
mhm.
That was the first time I'd actually heard positiveness, I think, and really took it to heart that it meant something that day.
I can't imagine the relief that you felt because you had to be so full of guilt and condemnation, and to hear
Yes,
somebody say something positive, because after all you've been through and you've survived and you've been functioning all of this time, just to hear those words had to be incredibly powerful.
right.
And
Because in my mind, Satan is telling me you're an addict.
oh yeah,
You're not a good mother. You've hurt these kids beyond repair. You're beyond repair, kind of
yeah,
thing.
oh
And
yeah,
yeah, and for him to point out that I've heard you talk about your children and they are decent people, like yes, and to
right,
hear that, yeah, it meant the world for him to tell me that he thought I'd done a good job. Yep,
amen. And at the same time, we understand that that statement isn't an excuse to continue in the behavior, right?
right.
But we
And that's one of the
understand.
things. Well, I found out there too, because that was one of the things that I come to realize is that that was one of the things I had been doing for so long, was because this happened to me, I have the right to do that. Because that happened to me, I have the right to say what I said. I
Yeah.
have the right to, and him telling me, no, you have, yes, you have reasons, and valid reasons, for feeling those ways. That don't give you the right to abuse drugs, or to not be the parent that you can be. No, it don't give you the right to do those kinds of things. Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's turn it around. Let's find some new ways to handle what's causing you to want to self-medicate, what's causing you to want to numb those feelings. And um,
Absolutely.
yep. So having to go back, even though it wasn't fun, he's told me we're gonna have to walk through some thick mud before we get out of it again.
Hmm.
And having to go back to those, those the childhood things, whether it be the bullying, or the way I felt when my dad wasn't there, the abuse with the stepdad, and walk back through those things again and truly deal with them. And then realizing at the end of the day, I was my I was my own worst enemy, because self-forgiveness was where I'd had the biggest issue. I had to forgive
Right.
myself. And
Right.
that was the hardest part for me, was learning to forgive myself.
It is. It is. And I found that for myself as well, especially when you realize that the choices you made don't just affect you, they affect other
Right.
people.
Yes.
As,
People that
as
you love.
moms with kids, we have mom guilt and all of that. And so it's tough. But like this therapist showed you, you've got to go back and revisit it, and you can walk with Jesus through those events and
Yes.
gain healing. You
Yes.
said that when you met with this therapist, many weights came off of you. And it sounds like you were on the road to healing. And you mentioned the tools that he gave you. So let's talk a little bit about the tools, because people are really struggling now. I mean, on a personal level, on a national level. What are the tools that this therapist helped you use in order to move forward in recovery?
Well, him and eventually Carla, that I would meet with another therapist, because of uh, Mr. Johnson eventually leaving. He was part of a military too, so he moved along. Was, first of all, a gratitude journal.
Mm.
I was told, Pam, start a gratitude journal, and at night jot down at least three things that has happened positive that has happened during the day.
Mm.
And I remember for a while there were at times it was hard to think of three things, and then getting to a point to where I had to stop myself from filling the page up, because I'm part of the tools was learning that there's always something to be grateful for. Even in the midst of my struggle, there's always something to be grateful for. So learning to pick those things out, even in the midst of a struggle, learning to pick
Absolutely.
the things I can be grateful for out of that. The other thing was, because of my addictive tendencies, I would eventually, even though I had not dealt with illegal prescription or illegal drugs, or even weaning off of the prescription drugs that I had been on, alcohol, I had learned had become a problem. So being told that an AA meeting might be helpful to me was a tool that I
Mhm.
implemented. And I walked through AA doors for the first time. Actually, January will be 3 years ago, and gave up alcohol on my own, because I did not like the person that I had become,
Mm.
when I was, and I realized that it was something I was turning toward it as a coping mechanism. It wasn't good for me. So AA was a tool that I used. Being of service to other people was a tool that I used. And when I say of being of service to other people, it started out in a lot of different ways. First of all, I found a church that I was able to go to, and I helped in the cafeteria serving meals to the kids. And
Mhm.
I drove vans on when they had outings, or a field trip. And then, here where I am now, helping build beds for kids, and delivering and setting them up for kids that don't have beds to sleep in. Getting outside of myself
Yes.
and staying busy helping other people. Doing it could be small things, and some days it's just as simple as, I really like that shirt you have on today,
Yeah.
or opening a door, or you can go ahead of me in line. It's those kinds of
Sure.
things, just, yeah, that helping other people,
I
being a
love
good
that.
person, a
Yeah.
better person.
Well, after the show, I will post those things, because I think that those are great reminders of tools that we can use, and that's beautiful.
Yes.
So you've walked through incredible healing. You got to the root of the issue that was causing the fruit, and that's where real transformation happens.
Yes.
God can get to those roots, and roots hide well,
Hmm.
and they can really take a stronghold and produce a lot of destruction in our lives. One of the things that you shared with me, Pam, was that your husband and his forgiveness and his support of you and his unconditional love really showed you the love of the Father.
Yes.
And that
Yes.
was a job that your earthly father should have done. And it sounds like, he didn't do that for whatever reason, but your husband did that for you. And I just love that. That is so beautiful that you have his love and support through it all.
Yes, definitely. And we'll be married 23 years this coming February. And yeah, by all
Congratulations.
means, he is my biggest supporter and fan. And definitely the reason I was able to reconnect with God and to reach out and find a church while he was deployed, because I was now learning to search the right places for when I was lonely, and the right kind of people to help support me around me for getting through those tough times when he was gone, because he would deploy while we were there as well, in Louisiana. And so, yeah, grateful for his love and grateful for the people that loved me during the time when he was not able to be there to do that. Through that, where I did, like I say, the most healing I'd done there. Yeah.
Amen. Amen. Well, you're 3 years without alcohol, 5 years without drugs. You even
Yes.
weaned off of anxiety and depression medication. So you have complete freedom. I know you go to the gym every day. You're taking
Yes.
care of yourself. You're giving back. And you even decided to do something really spectacular, which is you went back to school and got your GED because you
Hmm.
dropped out of high school, it sounds like.
Yep.
And now you're getting your associates because you want to be a counselor to go ahead and help people,
Yes,
like
my
other
therapist
people help
said,
you.
yeah, she one day before I got ready to leave, one of the last times I spoke to my therapist in Louisiana, she said, I really think that this might be something you'd be good at. And again, that having that little bit of belief in me, somebody pointing out something that they seen inside of me that I might not have seen in myself. Yeah, I walked back, the oldest person in my room, to try to hopefully be a licensed professional counselor and to be able to cheer someone through the things that was able to be cheered along the
Amen.
way through. Yes.
Amen. And you can have that book knowledge, but you have that experience. And I'll say it again, God wastes nothing.
Right.
Wastes nothing. That's so
Yes.
powerful. So one of the things that you said, Pam, as we close this interview is we were talking about just the difficult time that we're going through as a nation and worldwide with the pandemic, with
Right.
life not being normal. We just got through a holiday and
Hmm.
people couldn't gather as families and just all of it. It's a lot of fear, a lot of questions, not knowing what's happening, not knowing what's going to happen in the future. And you told me that if you weren't in a place of healing, that you would be back to using.
Hmm.
And I feel like we're hearing reports of a lot of people going back, relapsing, overdosing, people who were doing great, and then life changed for us in 2020
Right.
and they've slipped. So, what is keeping you from relapsing? Is it the tools you mentioned earlier?
Well, I can tell you, first of all, by the grace of God, and is there's nothing greater than grace. I'm going to say that from the get go.
Yes.
But I've also have found, yes, I get up and I make an effort, a concerted effort to get up and go to the gym every morning, because that little bit of whatever the endorphins is, it does keeps
Mhm,
me mentally in a place that I've already accomplished something for today. I make my bed every day when I get up. It's the first thing I do.
mhm,
It's little things like that that add up. You don't realize that they make such a big
mhm,
difference. Um, the volunteer work with church, because sometimes that happens during the week. Take a class. I mean, and it doesn't have to be. Luckily, I have the GI Bill that I get to use with the military. But you can take. There's a lot of things now because of the pandemic that are offered free online to take a class or paint a picture. Reach out, I think, is the biggest thing. Don't be afraid to reach out to a friend or a family member. regardless of how frustrated you might think that they are with you because you've said I'm sorry one too many times, I promise you, if you just will go say it and try again, they'll definitely be there to help and lend a hand. And of course, anybody, my friends, just be a little more patient. I think sometimes learning to scope those people out, be a little more patient. And I know for me, the gym, church, volunteering, make your bed, those the kind of thing, that little bit of fresh air. I remember my therapist saying, Pam, 15 minutes, a 15-minute walk around outside in the fresh air,
Yes,
it was more than any prescription. It will do you better than any prescription medication somebody can
absolutely.
prescribe. I've lived there and I've been that, and I've been on every kind of medication there is. And I'll do that. I mean, that's one thing I'll do. If I'm getting in my feelings or I'm feeling a little depressed, I'll do silly stuff like go walk around the front yard barefooted for a minute just to reground myself.
Yes,
And it definitely makes a difference.
that's awesome. And I think that's really going to help somebody. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Well, as we close today, Pam, I want to thank you again and tell our audience about the shirt that you're wearing because I love that. I love it. Overcomer.
Yes, this is my Overcomer shirt. I actually wore this when we got ready to leave Louisiana. It was on my birthday, and I was asked to share my testimony for the first time. And basically, I love the saying in Revelation 12:11 that we overcome him, Satan, by the blood of the Lamb and the voice of our bold testimony. So
Yes.
that's why, and I've come to realize that um, monsters don't seem so scary whenever we turn the lights on them. So
Mhm.
getting out and sharing my story with people like you that have the platform to be able to spread that out a little bit in front of a church, um, you know, it's made a difference for me because it's broken those chains of that
Yes.
shame and the feeling guilty, and I don't have anything to be ashamed of anymore. And there are so
Yeah.
many people that have come and said they identify on different levels, whether it be from the childhood abuse or the
Yes.
addiction or the food or the weight, whatever. Somebody can take bits and pieces and sometimes more than one piece of your story,
Right.
and if I can help or talk to somebody and it's a lot of spark in their life like somebody has done mine, then it's well worth sharing the story.
Absolutely. And that is my prayer for Voices of Recovery. So
Yes.
you are an overcomer. You are sharing your bold testimony. You are bringing light to the darkness and you're doing things and moving forward to continue to be a great cheerleader for other people, Pam. So
Well, I appreciate
yay.
you.
Well done.
Yes. And you
Well
too.
done.
I
Thank you,
appreciate you
Lord.
doing the Voices of Recovery and me happening along your page.
Yeah.
Thank God for technology and for
Amen.
you. Yep.
Amen. Well, thank you again and God bless you on your journey, Pam.
Thank you so much.
Yes, and I want to thank our audience for watching this episode of Voices of Recovery. We're creating a safe place where people can go on their journey with God. If you're new here, I'd love it if you'd give our page a like or a follow so that you don't miss any of this content. And if you feel led, share this message out because I'm sure there's somebody on your page who needs to hear what Pam had to say today. God bless you, Pam. And
Thank you.
God
You
bless our
too.
audience. We'll see you next time on Voices of Recovery. Bye bye.
Bye.